Thank you for joining us. I'll ask the Commissioner to do the acknowledgement of the Welcome to Country, please.
Yes. Hello, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we meet on is the land of the Kaurna people. And for those who are in other country, I believe it's Yorta country or...
No,
Wurundjeri country. Yes, of course.
We show it Yorta.
Yeah, greater country, yes. And that I wish to pay my respects to Wurundjeri and to Kaurna, because we're here gathering on Kaurna country where we sit today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. And I think it's really important to acknowledge all our families, all our children and young people who are on Kaurna country, our Aboriginal communities, but also all those Aboriginal children and families right across South Australia and indeed the nation who we pay homage to with the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've just asked my associate to have you affirm your evidence, please, Professor Bamblett, if that's all right with you.
Sorry?
I'll just have my associate have you affirm your evidence before we start.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I'll just ask you to repeat after me. I solemnly affirm that the evidence I will give.
I solemnly affirm that the evidence I will give
Will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And can you please state your full name, occupation, and address?
Yep, my name is Muriel Bamblett, and I'm the CEO of the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Council and chair of SNAPE, the National Voice.
Thank you.
Now, Sarah's going to help me. Can I get her affirmed as well?
Certainly.
Yes, I'll just ask you to repeat after me, Sarah. I solemnly affirm that the evidence I will give.
I solemnly affirm that the evidence that I will give
Will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And if you could please just state your full name, address, and occupation.
Sarah Ann Gafforini. I'm the director of the Office of the CEO at CACYP.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Bamblett, you mentioned the other day when I spoke to you that you would consider doing a presentation for today.
Yep. So we've got one. Sarah's tried to capture some of our conversation the other day. It went on for a little bit. So we've tried to sort of capture as much of that into this presentation. So we'll put it up. Do you want us to go through this and then ask questions after it? It's quite long.
That would be helpful. That would be helpful.
But if you feel you really want to stop us and ask some questions, please do. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I too want to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we're on and acknowledge the lands and waterways of this beautiful country. And as I heard someone say the other day, that beneath the cement and all of the things that have built on this country, there's still Aboriginal land, and the significance has never been lost on any of us. So I want to acknowledge, obviously, you, April, and the amazing work you're doing over there, and really have been pleased to be a part of this and find it really, knowing that it is a very safe environment to be able to come and speak to you. So I'm really thankful of the fact that you've made us feel welcome and safe to do this.
Thank you.
In talking to you today, we believe it's important to first off unpack the fact that Australia has 8 child protection systems, and from my experience, they're very different. And they've got different elements, some good, some bad. But I think the risk of our children coming into the child protection system obviously is in the data, and it just seems very much on par with other countries, you know, where children of colour particularly are overrepresented, but particularly First Nations children are overrepresented. And so what we can really see is that the child protection systems, from our point of view, attribute unnecessary risk and trauma upon our Aboriginal families and their children. So to me today, I want to touch on a few elements of the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle, our learnings from Victoria, and how we've tried to address some of the systemic and historical barriers to applying the 5 pillars, and hopefully some of the recommendations that South Australia could adopt in the provision of support to families for the purpose of reunification and placement within. So I know that I might go to the next slide, Sharon, Sarah. I guess it's really to put the context in Victoria. We have 16 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations in Victoria that are gazetted. So in order to deliver child and family welfare, Aboriginal child and family welfare, you need to be gazetted to provide child protection. At the moment, if you look at the numbers, 32% of Aboriginal children, and that's around 830, of 80% in Metro, and Inner Gippsland and Uplands Murray regions are under the control of the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Agency. So that's over 800 children. If you look at other regions, so within the Aboriginal, those 16 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, they have 392, and Mainstream obviously has 53%, which is something we're working with government around transfer, and we've got a policy commitment through Wangaroo Will Gap to it, a transfer all Aboriginal children back, and so it's a commitment through the Aboriginal Children's Forum, but it was a binding document through Beyond Good Intentions. So we've got an agreement through the Centre for Excellence with all of the mainstream CSOs to transition back to Aboriginal community control. But that wasn't able to happen until we actually got the department on board. And so there are some documents that talk about, and we're able to make them available. And one of them is the aspirations report that talks about where we're at with transitioning or transferring Aboriginal children back to Aboriginal community control. So it talks about some of the particular challenges for some of the ACOs who don't really want to enter the tertiary, don't want to do placement, but what do we do in those communities where they don't want to do it? So I might move to the next slide, Sarah. So this gives you a bit of a synopsis. So we offer 70 programs across our 7 sites, and so we've got almost 1,000 staff. VACA covers Melbourne Metro, Morwell, Inner Gippsland, and Ovens Murray, which is up Albury, Wodonga. And so, unfortunately, when we go to a region, for some reason, the child protection notifications actually become much more pronounced. And so particularly when we went to Ovens Murray, there was very little child protection up there. Now the numbers are really quite high, and we really don't understand that at the moment. But as you can see, these programs are very much focused, and we never started off like with this footprint, but as we started to do programs working with young people, and then we found out that, you know, youth justice and justice programs, and then we were working, you know, with families in child protection, and a lot of the parents were in prison, and so we started running men's programs, working with Aboriginal men in parenting, and so supporting men in prisons, and then we got funding for the Koori Women's Diversion Program, and so that meant we were able to work with women in the prisons, and a lot of those women had children in child protection and had a history of family violence. So you can see that, and you know, like the links with family violence, with homelessness, and so VAC has been able to extend a lot of our service reach to the service side of it, but we've also been able to strengthen our practice, and we deliver as far as cultural strengthening programs, healing, and, you know, therapeutic responses to children, and, you know, community support, particularly around emergency relief. A lot of our families, I think, would end up in child protection if we didn't have access to good brokerage funding and the ability to provide, so, you know, monetary support. It's not a lot, but it helps families, you know, with food and essential services. So you can see here, therapeutic family violence, that's where we've had the most significant growth. In 2018, we were funded for 500,000 for Aboriginal family violence. Today, we're funded 15 million for family violence. So that's where we've seen the biggest growth. And so we've got therapeutic clinicians, we've got Aboriginal people. We run working in the Orange Door network. So we have, we're running Aboriginal men's programs, camps, therapeutic healing, trauma, all sorts of programs and services aimed at working with families in the context of family violence. This gives you a big focus, obviously, is training, research, policy and advocacy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. A new program, or it's a program we've had for a while now, is the kinship family finding and cultural support. So kinship family finding, the government funds us to do family tracing, to do genealogies for Aboriginal children, or to locate Aboriginal families. So we get funded, and so we have access and relationships with the marriages, and so we have access to the title all over Australia to access different records to be able to establish children's identity and help them do their genealogies, so, which is really important. We also provide support to all the cultural support workers. So across Victoria, we have a number of cultural support workers that are funded to work in each of the ACOs delivering out-of-home care services. So, we bring those coordinators together. So, and the other role that the department funds is cultural family violence, cultural safety workers, and so they work with mainstream organisations to make them receptive and culturally safe when working with Aboriginal families. You did give me license to go on and on.
Yeah, this is no. Keep going. I want to hear. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so this gives you an idea of our youth footprint. So we've tried to sort of give you a sense of, you know, things that we do across, and this is really hard to read, and Sarah might be able to read it better from her point of view. Can you read that, Sarah?
Yeah. Yeah.
To read it.
Small font. Yeah.
Yeah, it's if I make it bigger, it just gets blurry.
Mm-hmm.
I think here, though, the most important thing really is to show that from VACA's point of view, we view kids as pre-birth, so 0, all the way through to 25 years old, and that we need to have the continuum of programs across. And while we have age ranges, we're not. If you could read this, we can send it through, you'll see the overlap in ages as well. So we, as Auntie Muriel just talked about in that previous slide, really wrapping around our kids, but you can see from, you know, across 0 to 18.
I've made it big enough that I can read it now. So
Okay.
So I mean, in the out-of-home care, so the 0 to 18, we've got, as I spoke about, kinship family finding, new therapeutic residential care. So we, when I started at VACA, we had 2 group homes, and we had 1 residential facility, Sharit's Weight Centre. We now have, I think, 11 residential units that we're running. We're converting them slowly to therapeutic residential units, 2-bed units, so that we can work intensively with young people. we run kinship care, we run kinship care first supports, which is a really interesting program because that is about providing supports to grandparents, to families that are, you know, I mean, many of our kinship families are more vulnerable than many of our foster carers, and so being able to provide them with supports, with respite, to be able to make sure that, you know, if they need, that we pick up children and take them to school. And so being able to support our kinship carers is probably the thing that means that we're able to keep carers longer. In this area, this out-of-home care, obviously our cultural camps, we do a lot of cultural camps with kids, career cultural placement and support. So that works with mainstream organisations that have got our Aboriginal children and have had them longer, and you know about cultural support. We do a lot of work for children in the home as well, books in home. So we provide children with books, reading books, and really encourage literacy and reading. We run the Navigator program, which is the 12 to 17-year-olds, and that, you know, is working really with young people to keep them out of, to be able to work intensively with them. We have the young fellas building safe and strong futures. So that again is a program where in the Dandenong region, it's not, all these programs are not consistent. If I said that there's 8 different approaches to child welfare from each state and territory, even in Victoria or across the 4 regions that we have within DIFA, who funds us, there's 4 different approaches to child protection, 4 different funding models, and 4 different, they all fund everything different. And so a lot of our funding tends to be, we apply for grants. And so we applied for one in Dandenong, and what that program does is work with highly vulnerable, complex children. There's a group of that they work with that are young people, and young our staff pick the young people up in the morning, take them to gym, and so they like to go to the gym and work out. Then they take them to the local neighbourhood's house and they have breakfast. Then they take them to school, and a couple of nights a week they pick them up after school, and they go and do homework clubs and do activities with other young people. Feedback from a lot of the elders and from people that would see these young people said these kids had no chance. They would have ended up in juvenile justice, and you've been able to break the cycle. So I think those sort of comments are the things that make you really want to keep doing it. We've got youth justice programs there, art mentoring, leaving care programs, better futures, narrow Jara noon, and so you can see different programs across the different age. So that's just to sort of give you a bit of sense of that one.
Are those programs, you know, initiated from within the community, or are they programs that are introduced by way of, you know, a government initiative? I'm trying to ascertain.
They're a combination. Like Navigator is a, but we put an Aboriginal overlay over them. It's strange because when they're first funded, they're just put out as, you know, a program, and then when we, you know, do a lot of work with them and change the program, they call them an Aboriginal program. And so,
yes.
But in reality, Navigator and Better Futures, Leaving Care, it's probably Leaving Care, we'd love to change the name because it's a shocking name. But Youth Through Care, a lot of those programs we've developed, we've got funding, various funding. Youth Through Care came with Commonwealth. That was a partnership that we had with Jesuit Social Services. So when we first got the funding, the department, Commonwealth didn't want to fund us to do it, but they wanted to fund Jesuit. Anyway, Jesuit came to us and said, look, we've got this opportunity to do some work with young people in the justice system. And I basically said, and they said, would you work with us? And I said, look, I'll work with you, but only with a view to you completely moving out and letting, you know, transferring it over to us. So 4 years down the track, you know, we were eventually able to get that program transferred over to us. So it can be done. So when we started, it was really quite hard to work with the mainstream and the way they work. But by the end of it, they were really sort of learning a lot more from us about different approaches and different ways. But it's so dependent on really good people working in those programs. The next slide is around our family violence footprint. So this gives you a bit of a sense of what we do in the family violence space, which is, as you know, I spoke to you before, it's our most significant investment. So you can see, I guess it's hard to read, but under the Northern Metro, we've got therapeutic programs, we've got women's and children family violence case management. We sit in the orange doors. And what we've found since we've been part of the orange door access to our programs and services, the department usually has between a 6 to 8 week waiting period and that is an awful long time when you've had an incident of violence, because you're more likely to have gone home. So our turnaround time is very short, and it can be almost immediate, or within a 2 week time frame, which even that to me is too long. But it just goes to the point that you need to have you need to be able to deliver those services. So we do a lot of work. We get funding as well through JELPJA, so that's our family violence. We've got a family violence task force, or not task force, but caucus, that sit down and come together. And there's funding made through the Victorian JELPJA Partnership Forum. And so that's between the Aboriginal community and Family Safety Victoria. And so there's a lot of funding that comes from there. So they fund us for healthy and respectful relationships. So we do videos and work with young women and young men around building really good relationships. I'm not quite sure if is there anything that I think the men's behaviour change program, a lot of people said, why are you doing that? And what we find is that a lot of the men, we focused on the behaviours rather than how the behaviour impacts on children and how it impacts on child welfare and on women and on parenting. And so a lot of our work is really around doing the work to get children back home and understanding the changes that dads need to do to get children home. We've done a lot of work around developing the multi-agency risk assessment framework to make it culturally responsive, so that now we're working on the adolescent approach to it. So it's really about how do we actually work respectfully with Aboriginal? How do we make it safe? How do we make the tools culturally appropriate when assessing and assessing risk, and when managing risk and understanding the context of family violence. So that's very quickly about family violence, but you can see where there are 17 sites for the orange door, and I think VACA is in 11 of those 17 sites. So it gives you an idea of how much. And we actually produce reports and data out of that. And so if you want to have a look at any time of any of our data, just let us know and make sure.
Have those risk assessment tools, are they limited to those 16 or so organisations that are the ACOs, that are the 16 gazetted organisations, or are those frameworks more broadly about how the mainstream system also picks up on the frameworks that have been developed by VACA in the space of domestic and family violence?
Yeah, I mean, we work with the government and make one tool, not an Aboriginal tool, and we include a lot of the cultural elements into that multi-agency risk assessment framework. So, yeah, did you want to add anything, Sarah?
It is compulsory. I think the defining point of MARAM is that it's not just for the practitioners as well. It's a whole of organisational framework and approach. So everyone from reception through to the CEO has to undergo the training, and I think that's the real power of it. And there's 3 levels. So there's more than 16 ACOs that deliver family violence as well. So it extends out past them plus to the mainstream.
Because it includes those not delivering child welfare. So it could be that like Guardian Mum operates a lot of the men's programs. So they would be applied at that. And there's a lot of different places that run programs for in the family violence. So a lot more providers in the family violence space. Yeah. All right, we'll keep moving. I think I'm on slide 6 of 23. The compliance burden, I didn't put a lot in, but I spoke about that there's quite a lot of compliance burden for background. So, and I think it's important when thinking about it, how do we make sure that we create the ability, because I mean, if I didn't have a really good compliance, if I didn't have good accreditation, good, systems in place, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I'd be, forever concerned about whether I've got processes in place for people to report, to be able to understand what's happening. And so you can see here what we do here in Victoria. There's client incident management systems. So whenever there's an incident, it has to be reported within 3 days, and that goes to the commissioner. So you would have heard from Mina about reportable conduct, child safe standards, and the client information system. So all of these things we're mandated to report on and notify and investigate. So the SIMS investigations focus on the child. The reportable conduct scheme investigations tend to focus on the behavioural issues that have been perpetrated by the adult. And we, obviously there's a lot of work that goes into the investigations. And so we actually employ, is it 3 staff, Sarah? 3 investigators that work full time on investigating client incidents that are happening. And so it's, being able to prepare the report, but also come up with a response. Some of our people, like one of our workers, came from the Australian Federal Police. So that's how skilled the work has to be, how complex the environment, and our staff are specially trained. And there's, because they have to really gather information, interview victims, witnesses, and be really sort of clear about what the conduct is, and understand the behaviours and the seriousness of it, and be able to make sure that we put things in place to protect children into the future. Right. I'll go to the next slide, Sarah. So obviously critical for us, and a lot of our focus, and everybody's focus at the moment is workforce. I mean, in Victoria, it's the same with South Australia, I would say. Finding a skilled workforce, we're not getting, social workers coming out, or even child welfare workers, or even skilled workers coming out of the TAFEs or universities. So for us, we've had to build our own workplace, and so we offer obviously for all of our staff, once they start, they must enrol in some sort of training to get accredited, whether it's a Cert 4 or whether it's a diploma, associate diploma. We have agreements with universities, Swinburne University, to get to have. So we average about 47 staff a year going through formal accreditation. So it means that, and then we bring on. We can average between 20 and 40 trainees a year, and they go on to full-time employment. So it's a really big focus of that. We couldn't have done it 10 years ago because we just didn't have the skill base in the organisation to support formal qualifications, but now being able to make sure that we've got, you know, performance development, that we've got, you know, commitment around supervision. We've got strong supervision policies, strong training. You have to be trained in everything at VACA. You can't even put a child into a car seat without being trained first. You get trained. I've never seen so many training for different things, but it absolutely. So a lot of our work, you know, is aligning and building an organisation. It's aligning our systems and processes with a massive reform, thinking about everything. You know, digitalisation, making sure that, you know, all of our staff have all of the appropriate systems that they're able to access, that they can do their casework at home, in the car, and be able to work wherever. There's a lot of focus, as I said, about professional development. We're really sort of pushing a lot of our staff. We've got internal leadership, internal management training and developmental opportunities. So, and no, perhaps you know would know, but obviously everything has to be linked to the strategic plan. We really, we didn't want to make really a lot of strategic plans just make a statement and just it doesn't have any real meaning. What we've tried to do is really link it to our work and and link it to our staff. And so it's really important that our strategic plan is a breathing document. We do benchmarking. We've done many times. When I first started, we were benchmarking with Berry Street, McKillop, all of the big mainstream to see if our staffing and our salaries were equivalent. So we've now got into a routine. They're either benchmarking us, we're benchmarking them. And so we also get, every 2 years, we go through a massive, 400 questions feedback, which, is quite exhausting, but it actually is aimed at finding out, getting from our staff about how they feel, what we need to focus on and what do we need to change in the way we work. As you can see, we have a real commitment to mental health support. So we have an employee assistance program. We've been able to negotiate with VARS, and so we've given some resources to the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service to provide counselling support to our staff. And so our Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal staff are offered that, and we also have a choice about another one, because some of our Aboriginal staff don't want to go to the Aboriginal Health Service. They just want their privacy respected. So, as I said, mentoring, traineeship, student placement. We get thousands of requests for student placement. So we're really trying to manage that. But I said, Teresa went on leave one time and I had to go into a computer to get something. And there are literally hundreds of secondment, requests for student placement and secondments to VACA. So, I mean, some of the challenges are competition for Aboriginal staff. We're all trying to cut each other's throat. The government really actively pursues our staff now, so and tries to get them to go into government, and because of the pay, they can get 50 to 100,000, in some cases 200,000 more than what you can get in an ACO. So we have a commitment to support Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal staff, but we do put a heavy focus on understanding the value of an Aboriginal workforce and the importance of Aboriginal supervision. And so we also have learning and development, but we also have an external training arm so that we are training mainstream employees as well. And so our learning and development is really, really intensive. It requires, done a sort of an employee life cycle, starting with day one, making sure that we're committed to, training our staff. Work cover is really killing us at the moment. I think it just gets more and more expensive. I think I'm not much of it. I think our cover's over $1 million for work cover. Pay that. I don't know if there's anything you could ever do about it, but it seems unreal. Might go to the next slide. Sarah, do you want to talk to this one?
Yeah, we really wanted to put in the fact that, you know, one of the things that's the point of difference for VACA, but also it really does link into this inquiry in terms of child placement principles, is our Aboriginal Children's Healing Team. And we developed this as an organisation mainly from our own internal resources, because we realised that our kids weren't getting you know, the right therapeutic supports. And so we have a multidisciplinary team. We've invested in getting our own psychiatrist 1 day a week, our own GP. We have mental health social workers, psychologists. We have art therapists, speech therapists. As you know, getting access to mental health supports in the community is really hard. And we just don't get funded for the therapeutic work within child protection as much as what the kids need. So this is our team and our model, but what we've also done is embedded our healing team into our residential care units. So they're actually physically there. That means that, you know, if we have some sort of after hours emergency, which is always when they happen, we can get access to really good quality mental health supports that the kids know and that they trust, so they don't have to go out to an external provider or possibly, you know, like the CAT team or something like that. So we strongly believe that you know, healing has to be that essential part, and that really does, I suppose, a placement with VACA means that you get access to this extra support. And we've been growing this and refining it and really tailoring it to the needs of the children and the young people as we grow, but also as the needs of our young people change as well. We noticed, especially during COVID, the feelings of isolation and loneliness and connection have been really important. And so that's what we've been building on here as well. They also do secondary consults to external organisations. Where they can help with disability assessments, and we don't get funded. One of the biggest issues is around getting access to, you know, developmental delay or ADHD or autism assessments. And so, not that we provide that, but we're really building our capacity to address developmental considerations. They also do behavioural supports through to our carers, and really try and wrap in and give all of the supports that we can so that our kids can heal and thrive.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Go to the next slide, Sarah. So, I mean, I guess you would have heard of that. Every state and territory has some sort of a plan with regard to child and family welfare. And so many years ago, when Andrew Jacomos did the Task Force 1000, and out of that, we, you know, he produced 2 reports, and those 2 reports really sort of drove the need, and in there were a number of recommendations that he put up a similar model to the Aboriginal Justice Forum, that he wanted the Aboriginal, all the child and family welfare providers to come together and to, you know, really sort of work together collaboratively around coming up with Aboriginal models and really addressing the issues that were raised in his report. And when he did the Task Force 1000, the Task Force 1000, and at the time there were, you know, just on 1,000 Aboriginal children that were in child protection. And what he wanted to do was interrogate each one of those files to understand what was happening, what were the blocks, what did we know, what did we not know, and how do we understand what are some of the barriers to really good outcomes for children. And so when he held these forums, it was quite amazing because the department and everybody took them so serious. There were legal reps sitting in the room interviewing child protection, interviewing whoever was the, had the care of the child. And they went through each of those cases. And Andrew was quite, sort of open to sort of be sceptical of both the Aboriginal and whoever had the child. But he was very clear in his, sort of comments with regard to Aboriginal organisations. He categorically said Aboriginal organisations do child welfare much better than mainstream, and you can see the better outcomes. So it was really heartwarming to hear that. But what he said is that there needs to be serious commitment, there needs to be a plan, and it really needs to, sort of, be driven by the fact that we need all children to be strong in their culture and proud of their unique identity, because so many of the children we are seeing, and I mean, when I've looked at, what I've done is looked at all of the cultural support plans and asked Teresa in my office, who collects them all, to actually look at how many of those children come from Victoria, how many come from other states and territories. And we were very shocked to find out that almost 50% of children that are in Victoria's child protection system aren't from Victoria. Many of them have had a significant history of removal, and particularly from areas such as Tasmania, seemed to be the predominant area where children were transferred to Victoria. And so, not as many from South Australia, but a lot of border children, and particularly a lot of families moving down for better access to housing, because you're more likely to get a house in Victoria than you would, in some other states and territories, and particularly NT. So we also, and so a lot of that commitment as well was to resource and support Aboriginal organisations to care for Aboriginal children and families, because we knew that many of the ACOs didn't have the infrastructure, didn't understand, really sort of what went into caring for Aboriginal children. But what we've seen is all the organisations that are doing it now are absolutely killing it. The things that they're doing, they're more involved in camps. They're linking some of those vulnerable families into and getting some really great outcomes as far as referrals to drug and alcohol treatment programs, behaviour change, and children are staying home, and children are going home. Commit to culturally competent and culturally safe services for staff, children and families, capture, build and share knowledge. These are the priorities for Wangaroo Will Gap Tour, and obviously the big one, which is last on this list, but never far from our thoughts, around prioritise Aboriginal workforce capability. And so it's great to have Aboriginal staff, but if you're not building their capability and also engaging them in, career development and, but also not just keeping them hidden in an office and just going to and from casework, giving them opportunities to participate in the community is really important to our Aboriginal staff. I think we encourage staff to attend NAIDOC, so that we give them NAIDOC day off to go and match. So we try and, do things that during NAIDOC week we will have a Children's Day activity in each of the regions. So we invest probably, 40,000 to hold NAIDOC activities across each of the regions. I think we fundraise for Christmas. How much do we get, Sarah? About 100,000.
We raise about 120,000, but we get so many toys donated.
Yeah, so we do a lot of fundraising, and a lot of we get a lot of support from a lot of people to give Aboriginal children Christmas presents. So the vision for Wangaroo Will Gap Tour is the next slide. So it sort of gives you a sense of what it is that we what we want to change. And so what we do is work out what do we want to change, what needs to happen, what's the data that we need to do, how do we develop a pathway to change, how do we monitor progress, and what does success look like. I'm not saying that we do this perfectly, but it is something that was always our vision and our agreement cycle, and we're just revamping this. And so what we're doing is looking at a refresh of Wangaroo, Wilwil, Gap, Jaw, so that we can actually start to refresh and say, what do we need to do? You know, we've got a little bit tired. So I think you suffer from fatigue once you get into 4 or 5 years into a strategy. And so Queensland's done the same thing. They've just done a refresh of theirs. So I looked at theirs, and I think that it's useful to do that as well. So go to the next slide, Sarah. So a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is building an Aboriginal evidence base, and I know that we had the Snake Policy Partnership yesterday on how to close the gap. And one of the things that, you know, is exciting is Snake's setting up a centre for excellence. Queensland's already set up a centre for excellence. We would love to have that, but that doesn't, just because we haven't got it doesn't mean that we aren't doing the work. So do you want to go through this, Sarah? You love this stuff. I shouldn't call it this stuff. It's information.
What we've done for our Aboriginal evidence base is really, we have a framework that applies to the whole of the organisation, which is our community, cultural therapeutic ways, and within that, building Aboriginal evidence around what works through Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing is really important. And so the key ingredients that we think are important to building that Aboriginal evidence is really about establishing the range of guiding principles. So within cultural therapeutic ways, it's heal, nurture and protect. And so that guides areas that we focus on in our research, but also our approach. We want to generate the Aboriginal knowledge. So actual Aboriginal people doing the research, gathering the data, it's designed by us, for us. We do use partnerships to make sure that we balance the need to, you know, meet Western thresholds, because that's what's perceived as a higher order research or evidence, but also making sure that it represents what we want. We have the outcomes framework. We have that now, which has been finished. We really look at the quality of evidence. So is it quality for us? We talk a lot about data and indicators, but are they meaningful for us in what we are evaluating? So not just all your publicly available data, but what's important to community and to drive service enhancements. And again, it's about that applicability. We have a focus on knowledge transfer translation. So really trying to look at that knowledge, see what it means in practice, and then how to actually embed that into our practice. Very much a big focus on lived experience. So everything we do from our policy papers through to our funding submissions, you know, really look at, you know, what are the experience of practitioners mainly, but also we use case studies a lot to really drive how we do that. Aboriginal theories and knowledge systems in place in program design. So really looking at trying to really embed the Aboriginal ways of doing into things that we're doing, and really prioritise and privilege culture. And that's probably a good summary. We have invested heavily in our own databases so that we can capture more up-to-date data from our clients so that we can see the trends about what's actually happening and does that correlate to what we're hearing. So that this is still an ongoing process and we're still building on this and getting better at it. And I think the next stage is really about how do we build into our practice implementation science. So we can develop amazing frameworks or theories of change, but if we don't implement it well, that's when things can fall over. So that's one of our focus areas. Muriel? Muriel? Is she there?
Yeah, on mute.
I was going to say, Sarah, I'm happy for you to do the next two slides. Just one and the next one.
Okay. So last year when we were going to give evidence to URUK, which is our truth-telling process here, the Premier Andrews at the time said that he was interested in really changing the way, really investing and changing over representation. And in January this year, he gave us a commitment that he wanted Aboriginal decision making in Aboriginal hands, and he asked us what our ultimate asks were, and to come backwards. And so one of the first things we did was this. We really looked at the model that operates at the moment and how we wanted to do things differently. We didn't want to throw out things that we know were important, which is about safety and making sure that children are removed if they need to be to protect them, but really a different approach that we know would work from our experience. So you can see here that early help is not, it's often confused for early years, but we really wanted to make sure that this was a real menu of services. So it's early help and early in need, not just early years. And we call that strong and deadly communities. So really focusing on the community supports, families together. I think that the biggest part is really about the new commitments that we had that help us do this model was through the state budget. So we get to expand our Aboriginal children and Aboriginal care. We'll talk about it soon about rolling out investigations and how we can act earlier. We'll be looking at the intake model and the Aboriginal-led case conferencing that you can see underneath the diversion is really about working with families before they have to undergo an investigation. And then there's all those other circles of care that we talked about and how that wraps around our families. So we really it's really about family strengthening and keeping kids at home where we can, and where they are out of home, returning them sooner and not having them then re-enter care later on. We really want to return kids and they stay there. They stay home and they have strong, functioning families. So we changed our model, but it is still, what's in the current funding sphere, and we have so many ideas about how we would actually change this and do things differently as well, which are part of the ongoing conversation. Did you want me to talk to this one, or did you want to do that?
No,
this one? Okay. So when we looked at the terms of reference for this inquiry, really wanted to just give you a little bit more around the Victorian context around the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle. So it was interesting for me, because I've only been in this space for 3 years, to see that the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle was actually adopted in 1979. So that's 2 years after VACA was established. But the most important part here is that the prevention principle was only added this year. So we've had 4 of the 5 in the Act and in our legislation for a very long time, but we haven't had prevention. And I think that that speaks to the numbers that we have in Victoria, because we do have the best system. We have amazing legislation, but we haven't had a focus on prevention. I think that speaks for itself.
I want to just touch briefly on the numbers of children in care and how much funding we get, the proportion of funding we get for prevention.
Yeah, so there are there's 2,600 Aboriginal kids in out-of-home care in Victoria, and when you look at it throughout the system, we start off at about 11% if you look at the early help, which is around investigation stage, but we only get 4% of the funding. And then our kids just increase and increase as you go through the stages of kids being in out-of-home care. So they're, 28% of the out-of-home care population, but we never get proportional funding at any stage. So to make, return more kids home, we could do so much more in that earlier stage. But a second they're removed, they're there for a long time, and that's the part that we don't like, and which is why we've got our Noogle program and the guardianship. We put in that dot point there about, you can have amazing legislation, and we had the opportunity to start Aboriginal guardianship in 2005, but we didn't get there until 2013, 2015. So it took 10 years of lobbying to actually start the process and let us actually deliver that. I talked about the commitment this year. Muriel talked about Task Force 1000. I think the other two parts of the context that are really important is, SNAKE did a review in 2020, and I think it speaks to what we in this room know, that there is a general lack of understanding about Aboriginal kinship systems and child rearing practices, and that they're often viewed as a deficit where they're not. It's just different. The SNAKE review also found that placement decisions are made, too quickly without consideration to Aboriginal families. And that speaks a lot to how poverty is used as a default for neglect, and that less families are able to come forward because, they think they can't afford it, or they don't get the right supports, or, as we've talked about, family isn't found. And we'll talk more about kin and that impact. This year, you would have seen the 2023 URUK report recommendations, and this says exactly what we say. Main recommendations are keeping siblings together. We have the opportunity to use Aboriginal family-led decision-making. It's meant to be used as a preferred option. It's only used 24% of the time. And again, here, it's about the teeth of your legislation and your commissioner as well. It's compulsory in Victoria to consult with ACOs, but it only happens at 63% at investigation stage and 21% at permanent care. But that being said, we're really only funded at those levels as well. So while I don't think there's a desire to consult up to 100%, even though it is compulsory, even if they did as an ACO, we probably wouldn't be able to meet the 100% threshold because we just don't get funded to do that. We don't have enough staff to do that. I think one of the interesting things that was in the URUK report is that while the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle has been around for a long time, it indicates in that report that it's the first time that state child protection staff will be offered training in the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle. And so I feel like they have had training before, but we do have new legislation that makes it, makes it compulsory to look at the considerations of decision making. And really, I think as we've talked about, one of the recommendations, it found that there is discrimination against kinship carers in terms of how they're supported, how they're paid, but also in placement decisions. So that's our current context.
Yep. So I think as Sarah showed you, and what she's reiterated is that we do have really good legislation, but at the moment there's no consequences for not following the Aboriginal child placement principle, except for the child and family when it is not followed. So every state and territory has the same issue, and one of the points we were raising in a conversation just the other day was around it seems that the mainstream organisations, once they place a child, they never make any active attempts to actually comply with the Aboriginal child placement principle as well. So it seems to be the only one with the real obligation and responsibility is the Aboriginal sector of the department. So what is the obligation? So if you've got like Anglicare and they've got a high number of Aboriginal children, what are their obligations and responsibilities to place children for the Aboriginal child placement rules? So the bill we managed to get, this year we managed to get a bill introduced and passed, and that has a statement resolution at the front, and one that has binding principles. This wasn't an easy process, and it took 18 months of development, and it couldn't have happened if we didn't have our own legal team. And what is proving of greatest value to VACA is having legal expertise, having lawyers employed in your organisation, and to be able to prepare your reports, but also in writing legislation, in writing policy. It's at the moment, it's not all the wording we wanted, and it was backwards and forwards, but we did fight to ensure the principles were binding and that it would change practice. It is about, the decision makers like the court will need to be asking practitioner questions about how they apply the statement of recognition, and it provides advocates, family and ACOs and others with the legal arguments when reviewing the DIFIS practice, so the child protection practice. But then ultimately, Aboriginal, we have to ask ourselves as well whether we follow our own practice, because sometimes it can be quite challenging. This bill also progresses rights and self-determination to include the expansion of Section 18, which is the guardianship legislation, to include investigations. So we're sort of cautiously excited about this. I mean, we're only going to be funded for 87 targets. So this is a bit that concerns us, is, how quickly the government will run a reform agenda. But I think there's, we've just met this morning with the treaty co-commissioner, co-coordinator, Ruben Berg, and we're talking about how do we actually, develop treaty binding principles and start to sort of look at what can the treaty as well, what legislative, what things can the treaty actually, put in place. And so I think from our point of view, I think that that's an opportunity that provides greater oversight and greater accountability mechanism, and I think it fits really importantly into that. There's been the expansion of Aboriginal parent in the Act to recognise Aboriginal family dynamics and avoid more children being on orders to the Secretary. There's also alignment to Section 13 of the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle with the snake review, and that's to strengthen the participation and preservation. So we'll go to the next slide. An important part is the work of the Maram-Nalu Gambu. So Maram-Nalu Gambu is a Koori hearing day in the family division of the Children's Court. So they have a dedicated magistrate, and they sit down And so it's a big table similar to what you're sitting at, but it's got cultural artefacts on it. And the magistrate doesn't sit at the bar, she sits at the table. Many of the other magistrates were really sort of, you can't do that, there's no protection, you know, blah, blah, blah. But two of the magistrates really were keen to sort of say, no, how can you sit with Aboriginal families and be up on a bar and just creates a very unsafe and not culturally responsive environment. And so what we've seen is huge success through that, and through this we've been, their role is to provide more effective, culturally appropriate and just responses to Koori families. And so they actually employ a Koori services coordinator and family support officer. They handle cases from start to finish, so it's not like this magistrate's on, she's going to pass to another one tomorrow and another one, which happens often in the children's court. It's one magistrate along that follows all the way through. That and they really sort of apply a therapeutic justice practice approach, and so it is really about judicial case management of every aspect of the law. Sarah, can you? I'm going to cough. I have a coughing spell. Can you take it from?
Yep. And so I think they've added on-site counselling, childcare facilities, and the different court assessment processes, and they can support in those referrals, to therapeutic drug treatment programs, parenting programs, and those other parts. Did you want to talk about that case where the magistrate sent people home?
Yeah, I think we've had lots of feedback reports. We get reports from the courts. We actually get reports from the legal profession. We've got a letter from the Victorian Law Reform Commission about a number of the court reports that our staff put in. But the one case I want to talk about, and I got my data wrong because I thought it was because we do a high five when one child goes home. And so when the magistrate McPherson came, she wrote a letter to us and she said today she had the pleasure of sending 8 families in getting all of their children who were on long-term orders and who were on orders for over 2 years. She had the pleasure of sending those 8 families home with all of their children. Now, these were highly complex families, and it just goes to show you that when you have an Aboriginal organisation that does the hard work and that really understands and hangs in there with families, really sort of does all the referral pathways, make sure that the whatever the magistrate's saying, that you follow up on it and that you can get children home. I think that what we find through the work of the court and through our Noogle team is that we can get children home. Now, our reunification rate for children is 24%. The department is 12%. So that means that an Aboriginal child placed with VACA is more likely to go home if they're on a long-term order. Now, if we applied that same thinking to the 2,000 children, if the reunification rate, we could potentially see half the children that we've got in care go home if they had the same level of, access to the court, access to, judicial, supervision by the court or case management by the court. If there's, on-site counselling at the courts, they provide on-site counselling to the parents. It's well, there's a therapeutic drug treatment programs that have been accessing, but I think they're thinking about cancelling the court drug treatment court. There are also parenting programs, vocational training and regular court. So these are things that if we work in parallel with the courts, we can get really good outcomes for Aboriginal families and we can get just outcomes. and equitable. And so what we've really repurposed our court reports, and so our court reports, what we've been getting feedback from the courts and even from the legal, is that they are based on what's the best information, really good information. And from my understanding, and I don't know a lot about contested hearings, but they keep saying we've only ever had, in all the years since we started ACAC 6 years ago, we've only had one contested hearing. So I'm not sure if that's a great, do you know if April, that's a good stat or not?
Oh, well, this is the first time I've heard any data on contested hearings. So I can't comment on the comparisons. So it's something I'll certainly need to examine. Yeah.
Well, it's about whether everything that's in the order is, is meets the needs of the client, that the lawyers don't disagree, that the courts don't disagree. So I think that's my understanding. But sounds good, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Anyway, we might go to the next slide. So the prevention principle and the delayed impact. I think from our point of view, I think if you have the things in place, if you really want to prevent and stop, and I mean this was really obvious when we went to the Northern Territory. Like they make all these orders and there's no ability to address either trauma, there's no treatment programs, there's no healing supports, there's no early help, there's no capacity. If you're struggling, you can't go into an organisation and say, look, I've got a baby, I haven't got a house, I haven't got a home. If you can't offer those basics. And so a lot of our focus is really through funding through the Commonwealth for Emergency Relief. We offer, a lot of supports to families to keep children out, but we've also got a strong family support system, family services. We hang in with families. It's all of the, the model that we put up, but it's not sort of being one single entry point. We have a really big focus on strength-based and language. A lot of our Aboriginal people, we've tried to change the language of child protection rather than investigation. We're changing the language to tell us your story. And notification is about, just really sort of, because people that see investigation as a horrible, a notification, a protective application, all of these things really create trauma for people. So a lot of our model is changing the language, and what we call it is, we call it using big auntie energy. And so understanding, that child protection should be about support and, being able to offer, like be a big auntie to families when they're in strife. I think participation is strength-based. We might go to unborn. Do you want to do this, Sarah? Yes. Quick to move your finger on that button.
Oh, no, sorry. I think the first point is really about talking, like Auntie Muriel said before, around the different, we have 8 different child protection systems, but where that's really obvious is when it comes down to, unborn, and when a child protection system can act, I suppose, or government can act. And, concerns about the safety of an unborn child or children at birth can be reported at birth at all states and territories. So Tasmania is the only jurisdiction where there are mandatory reporting requirements as well. So as a general principle, referral to child protection, we think, should be at the earliest opportunity after pregnancy is confirmed, but so that you can preserve the family. Like, removal should be the last resort. So as you probably know, New South Wales, Western Australia, Queensland and Tasmania have statutory provisions for investigation during pregnancy to determine whether or not the unborn child will need protection after birth. But in Victoria, for you, ACT and Northern Territory, legislation doesn't allow for those investigations until the child's birth. And then, Australian states and territories don't recognise the legal personhood of a fetus. And it limits child protection jurisdiction to after a baby is born. And until then, intervention is provided on a voluntary basis. And we know that, lots of our women don't access antenatal care, or if they've had a previous report, they're going to tick the 5 boxes that make an unborn report really quickly. And in some cases, if you've already had child protection involvement, it's an automatic unborn report for your second child, regardless if it's a different father or a different circumstances. It could be 5 years later, but it will still trigger one. I think the extent, the children's best interest, parental involvement and participation in case planning needs to be more actively encouraged. VACA has an Aboriginal-led systems-based solution to Aboriginal baby removals. But here we had to get the support of philanthropy to actually invest in our Bringing Up Aboriginal Babies at Home project. And so that involved us getting funding off a group of 8 different philanthropy organisations that came together, and that we co-designed that model with the community down in Frankston. So we had multiple consultations to do that. And the 3 years later, at the end of that pilot, again, pilot because we don't get long-term funding, is that we've been able to embed that worker, a VACA worker, in the Frankston hospital within the maternal and child health unit. And so it's really let us have enhanced coordination between antenatal care, child protection and Aboriginal services. I get to go to different meetings where government goes, oh yeah, we've got BUPA. And I went, excuse me, we've got BUPA. So you know that it's really successful when government's claiming credit for it. And claiming credit for it so much, one of our staff in Frankston said, oh, did you know government's got this? I went, no, we do. But really, it was born out of our staff seeing that we had lots of young mums in Frankston, lots of young mums that have come out of care themselves, and they just don't have that support person there to help them through the process and keep their kids at home. And so it's really holistic. It's family inclusive. So we work with mum, dad, and any family that wants to be involved. It is case management, but it is really wrapping around supports early in pregnancy and after pregnancy. So there's lots of talk about the 4th trimester and how important that is once the baby's actually born. And it really is an empowerment process. And it's inclusion. We do include child protection in the decision making. So it's taking some of that fear out of asking for help, and it's been really successful. But I know we talked about data as well. Did you want to talk to this one, or did you want me to?
No, you're on a roll.
Okay. Auntie Muriel's always pushed the Aboriginal Children's Foundation to reflect on. There's this study from the USA where if you de-identify the kids, you can actually see that it's American. So if they were African-American kids, they were more likely to be removed just by essentially ticking the box. And so at the last ACF DIFA in September, did a similar study where they just looked at known risk factors. And this is the data they gave back to us, which was really shocking, actually. While we kind of knew it to be true, it's always hard when it's in your face. And so when they just looked at known risk factors, Aboriginal accounts for 45% of meeting that threshold for unborn reports. So Aboriginal kids are 5 times more likely to have an unborn report just because they've ticked the Aboriginal box. And then the same as into care entry. So 17 times more likely to go into care, and Aboriginal alone accounted for 65% of the risk factors. And I think that should be more shocking to more people. But it was just kind of presented as a data blip, and that's it. So I think, you know, racism is very real within the system, but we need more data like this to actually show, you know, where we can change the system and how we can change policy and practice. But I wanted to make sure that we put that in there for you just to show it, because we've never had this data before ourselves. It's very fresh.
Thank you.
All right. I mean, we're getting too close to the end, so we've only got a couple of more slides. So,
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, whatever investing in, look, it's been an uphill battle. We've had to fight some really, you know, terrible racism issues from the department. But when we talked about, you know, like government needed to invest in the 16 ACOs many years ago, one of the chief ministers, chief of staff, but they don't have the infrastructure. They could never do it. And so when we started to, even when we began on this journey in 2005, Jill Callister, the secretary at the time, and Kim Peake were trying, really sort of talking to the Aboriginal community, say, would you be prepared to take on guardianship? And we were all like, and you know, my husband at the time was, no way, stay away from it. You don't want to do this. But Jill Callister put in the room, she said, at the moment, Aboriginal organisations have got little or no influence, and she went through, you know, a various stages of influence, and she was, you know, she said you can have status and no influence, influence and no status. So she talked about the fact that by having, by taking on guardianship, that would be the most dynamic way for Aboriginal people to influence child protection. And so she basically said you can sit on the fence or you can just sit behind the fence at the moment, which is what, you know, basically we were doing, not taking it up and just throwing stones at the department and blaming everybody and putting numerous reports out saying how horrible child protection was, or we could actually do it ourselves. So, but this, as I said, there's been a lot of people that just would not believe that ACOs could do it. And so when we began this journey, when we went to Canada and had a look at what they were doing in guardianship, and we took a number of the ACOs, and a few of them came back and said, no way, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Because obviously we went to Manitoba where there were 8,000 children in care and 6,000 were First Nations children. They transferred the whole of child protection over to First Nations. And so, and the first child death that they had, you know, the community wanted them, you know, wanted their heads in a noose. And so the Premier or Prime Minister of that particular province, or, you know, Minister of that particular province stood behind the Aboriginal organisation. But, you know, the thing is that for us, when we came back to Australia, one organisation hung in there, and that was Bendigo and District Aboriginal Co-op. And today, Bendigo is on a par with us. Every step of the way, we've brought them on the journey. We've given them all our resources, all our materials. We've developed them all. And because we've, you know, got a lot more infrastructure. So today, Bendigo is, you know, an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation that delivers health, early years, child protection, justice, family violence, the whole raft. And they've grown, you know, doubled in the size of their staffing, and the footprint around family violence, housing and homelessness has grown significantly. And through strengthening a lot of this work, they've actually strengthened their governance. They've been able to strengthen their just by giving them more depth and more funding. they've been able to strengthen their governance, their accountability, and now they're well recognised within the state as a leading organisation. But since they've come on board, we now have 5 ACOs. We've got 3 that will be taking on full guardianship. We've got 2 from Ballarat, Ballarat just moved, so we've got 3 that have gone. Nernda's on the way, and there are up another 2 that are entering the tent. So at the moment, so we're almost heading to half of the states are moving to take on ACAC or Aboriginal guardianship. So a key bit of the work that we're also doing is working with the department around identifying system levers to be able to, understand what needs to change, because the funding at the moment is very, ad hoc. Like we got 140 million for child protection, but we're not guaranteed that long term. So what we're really sort of clear about doing is putting an evaluation framework in front of the work that we're doing now, making sure we capture evidence, that we have data, that we're actually being able to demonstrate what, the value of that 140 million. We obviously need workforce, self-determination, the principles that we have in Victoria, leadership and culture. We've got a funding policy commitment from FSV and from DIFRA. FSV is really sort of not formalised, but every time a submission goes in, they put in for 10% of the funding to go to Aboriginal. We have a number of partnerships with mainstream, and so our view is that there must be a sunset clause or an end date, and that no contracts or, there should be no commissioning or tendering of services without a sunset clause for a mainstream. We know that we need to set timelines for change. For us, when we couldn't really get legislation, we couldn't get ACAC or guardianship on board. We kept having delays. There was always something wrong with the legislation, and so, but we drew a line in the sand and we said we've got to have a date. And when we met with the Premier, one of the things is that we put dates in the rooms, and it was really quite, he was surprised at how ready we were for a reform agenda, that we had the blueprint and that we were able to say, this is what we have, this is what we want. And he kept looking around the room, pleasantly surprised that we were as advanced. I just think he thought he was going to have a conversation. But we basically put our blueprint for reform, and he said, I want the department to go away, cost it for me and come back with a budget. So we came back with a budget. We told him about what we needed, and he committed to 140 million to fund it. So I think when you do have those sorts of commitment, and they're some of the things that we've been talking with the Treaty Assembly, the First Peoples Assembly, is, why did it take the Premier to do that? Why isn't there? What do we need? And they're really keen to look at what policies and legislation and frameworks can they put in place to make sure that reforms don't just drop off, or that there's a constant appetite to change the way the systems work. So the next slide is family preservation and reunification. So there's been a lot of investment in Victoria on family preservation and reunification, and so this was a program, and like I would love to tell you that every time a new program comes out, the government says, yes, we're going to have an Aboriginal one. They don't. So when they advertised this family preservation, they were tendering it out, and there was to be no Aboriginal at all. We had to go back and aggressively argue that a number of those had to be Aboriginal. They then had to go through the data. We had to meet all of these particular criteria to get it up. Initially, they just offered a couple, and then we had to argue and go back. And then they said, well, not all the ACOs are ready for this. And so they didn't offer it again. They didn't offer it to every ACO. And so what we're finding is that given, like what we talked about, ACAC and our capacity, under guardianship to have more children go home, it makes sense that that our Aboriginal family and reunification program, if we had it early enough, and if you think about like the child protection diversion programs that we're running, for every $1 invested, there's a $5 saving. If we start to be able, with all of our programs that we've got, I think that there's a capacity really, and we will see, we're already seeing it, but once we take on investigations, once we have more Aboriginal children under I think that you will see, we will see changes in the data. I'm not sure, Sarah, if there's anything I should add to that.
No, I just think that the question around kin is important.
Okay, so we'll go to kin. I think that kinship care has always been a really big issue, and I mean, a couple of years ago, when we looked at transitioning Aboriginal children to Aboriginal community control, we found that the department was actually the biggest carer of Aboriginal children because all kinship care sat within the department. And so it was really a big challenge to get it out of the department. Initially, what happened was the department just wanted to transfer some of the kids that they didn't want. And so we had to be really, astute in what children we took. And we basically said, we're not going to take any children until we actually do an assessment. And the worst case scenario that we had was the child in Gippsland. The department wanted us to take this Aboriginal child. The worker down there said, not until I see them. We've got to cite the child and, talk to the carer and to the child if it's age appropriate. When they went to the house, the child was, I think 2-year-old. When they visited the family was quite a big family, solid family size, not just numbers of siblings, but they were obese. And what the worker found when they went in there was this child that was very thin. Anyway, she basically, and the child did not look well. So the worker said, we're not prepared until there's an urgent check on the child. When they took the child to the doctor, an independent doctor, they found that the child was 2 weeks away from so malnourished. They said another 2 weeks and the child would have survived. But what was really interesting is they placed the child and they never asked. The father of this child was doing really well, but he was in another state and nobody had bothered to find him. So when we removed the child, we put the child in one of our therapeutic placements, and so the child was, fattened up and looked really healthy and doing really well. And then we actually found that the father was in a job, doing really well, had a new partner, they'd had a new baby. And so we went and looked for this, found this dad, and dad took this, 3-year-old child now into the care. And anyway, gorgeous thing was dad sent us a video of his older child going to school and of this younger one coming up and cuddling the little one as they came out of school. So it was just, it goes to the thing that we don't look for fathers. We don't ask about where men are, particularly Aboriginal men. We tend to preference, and a lot of our kin is to non-Aboriginal kin. And so it goes to the white side of the family. And this is the department. And the department will often say, oh, yeah, they're with kin. But they don't actually say, well, they're not actually with Aboriginal kin, they're with non-Aboriginal kin. There's often really big issues around they don't place them with their siblings. And, there's a few also, and some challenges for us is separating Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal siblings. So the Aboriginal child can go with one family and the non-Aboriginal child go with the other. And so our view is siblings we should always work in what's in the best interest of the Aboriginal child, not separate them because of the parents that they have. Our family finding support's underfunded, not prioritised. So we're reviewing that and looking at how do we do it better. We're looking at how do we use kinship family finding to confirm Aboriginality for children, because a lot of the children we have there, we have a requirement in our cultural support planning that all children have a confirmation of Aboriginality.
Yeah.
There's really quite often there's not a lot on good media, and there's no real incentive to be a kinship carer in our community. We know that cultural support plans, there's no resources or brokerage dollars to go and do, and so there's no real understanding. I think de-identification and confirmation of Aboriginality are big issues. So what we find, we tend to find that, and what's really most distressing is a child that's been de-identified at first placement, and then 2 or 3 years later, we find out that the child is an Aboriginal, and it's really, really challenging because you see pictures of them with the Aboriginal flag and they're participating, and all of a sudden we find out that their parents are not Aboriginal, and we have to do the work around de-identification. I think reunification always, I think kinship care kids drift, we tend to not reunify them or do the work to reunify, and sometimes the grandparents won't believe that their families will change and really want to keep a hold of their grandchildren. So it's quite hard to sort of really, and we've seen some of the most hardened grandparents change their mind and really thank us for doing the work to get the child back home, because they can see that their grandchild does do much better, and they can be grandparents, not be carers. And so I think we're trying to do a lot more work in that space, but we're really trying to encourage grandparents to be grandparents. I think, I'm not sure if you've got the next slide, Sarah.
I was going to add, we had that case recently that you were telling me about, how we were asked to consider a permanent care order, and we thought that we'd just do that last minute kinship finding, and we actually found family. So I think in that case, family finding needs to happen at every placement decision, because we can't guarantee or assume that it's been done. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, you're fine.
Last one.
Good. Last one. I think the aim of VACA obviously is to really focus on the needs of children and focus our work on really sort of adolescence age and stage, and really sort of, but I think if I left here not sort of saying a lot of our work is about restoring and giving back culture to children. A lot of the children we've got don't know who they are, don't know where they come from. And so a lot of our work, and normally I would show you a slide of Ruby and what we've done for Ruby in it, 15 years of being with VACA and all of the things, that we've, been able to do around, age and stage, doing work with her around art mentoring, about music and singing. Now she does, she's turned herself into a full-time business doing digital, art. And so, doing this work, return to countries, children, we have a really big focus on children knowing and going and feeling their own country, taking their shoes off and feeling their country and knowing where they come from. But knowing the stories of their countries, who they are, who their heroes were, who were the Aboriginal people that, led their particular country, traditional country where they come from. We've got a strong focus obviously on cultural genealogies, confirmation of Aboriginality, access to cultural activities, art, dance, songs. So we do everything to try and because some kids want to do art. I can't even draw for the life of me. I can't sing. I can't dance. they could probably go to a camp, but I mean, we need to strike where children are at. And so we had one young girl, she just didn't fit in, and then we found she could write the most unbelievable poetry. And so she started to develop Aboriginal poetry for us and write poetry. And then we've had others that have done different things. So from our point of view, how do we use culture? But I think, you know, the reason we use culture so much is around Bruce Perry, and he's talking about how access to culture and being involved in culture is a resilience and certainly empowers children and makes children. And if you saw all the cultural support plans, there are kids with their faces painted up with Aboriginal T-shirts, participating in all sorts of different activities. And it's really amazing to see how they really gravitate towards their culture. But an example of that is Margaret Rao, who was a paediatrician at the Aboriginal Health Service. She spoke one time and she said, and looking at what I was seeing with children, she said, what I found was when asking 85% of the children that I asked about what to draw to make them feel safe, 85% drew the Aboriginal flag. So, you know, people think that the symbolism of the Aboriginal flag is only, you know, sort of this, you know, advertising tool, but it actually means a lot to children. And we see it every day where they wear the clothes, where they, you know, have it painted, they constantly, you know, cling to the flag. A lot of our work is around education support. I mean, we've had a great focus on making sure children are school ready. So we run 11 playgroups. The VACA runs playgroups across all our regions to make sure that we're picking up on children's developmental, their disability needs, making sure that we do everything to make sure they're school ready. Recently, we've started to really look at disability as well, and so create partnerships with disability services. So undiagnosed disability is a significant issue for us at the moment. Digital poverty is also a really big issue. When COVID hit, I don't even know how we you know, didn't assess the fact that kids didn't have a computer or the ability. How do kids do their homework if they aren't able to print off their assignments and things like that? And so I think from our point of view, it wasn't just kids needed a computer, but the technology. And so I think that we now have a real great focus on making sure Aboriginal kids in care have, you know, the technology and computers to be able to do their work at home. So that's critical. Now, would you believe that's our last slide?
Excellent. I'm going to ask a question.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for that. And I've got a question, which is about, I guess, relating to the fact that delegated authority exists in Victoria. And I'm interested to know who gets to determine which organisations gets delegated authority. So that's one part of the question. And the other part of the question is then who gets to determine, like, which children are referred to the organisation with delegated authority. I'm interested to know how that actually happens and whether there are a set of principles or criteria that drives that, but to understand how it's operationalised.
Yeah, I mean, we sent to Queensland all the guardianship papers and so the practice, and I'm happy to send those to you because that'll give you like the pro formas, the process. But the secretary has the delegation to transfer authority to me. So there's actually I have to pull in a report. The staff put in a report. They actually. There's a lot of work that's done. We work with the regions to identify children that potentially could go across. And so, and what I'm telling you is they're not easy kids. So I'd love to say, oh, these, you know, kids, they're the soft, easy kids. And we fought against that initially because the department did want to give us the easy ones. And we said, no, if this is going to be true, we need to take those children. So we constantly work with them around what children are eligible, but there's quite a lot of work. The reports are quite, really sort of focus on all elements of the child. I'm just going to try and bring up one so that I could sort of go through it, because I just had one. They come up all the time, don't worry.
Do you want to find that? Because I was going to add, so what we found through the aspirations report that Annie Muriel referred to earlier, for why we haven't met the transfer of Aboriginal children targets, is that especially during COVID, they have one worker within each region. So we have 4 regions here in Victoria that are responsible for really looking at which kids could be transferred across through that negotiated process with us. During COVID, they rediverted resources. So those meetings normally happen monthly. So it's a really active process of going through which kids could go. During COVID, they stopped. So we're playing catch up now. And they've acknowledged that they didn't resource that properly, but we don't get the matched resourcing, I think, is the bigger thing. We just do that out of our own process. But did you find it?
Yeah. So there's a form that comes to me, and so it obviously has client name, date, age, date of birth, what type of order they're on, and when the order expires. And then in the information that I get, it has where the child is and has the name of the child, the relation to the child, the age, the date of birth, the address, contact. And so the one I've got in front of me here, the child obviously lives with a lot of cousins and siblings. And so then there's a summary of all the protected concerns. So it's all the information about mums, poor mental health, family violence, criminality, activity, transients, and so information about the Aboriginal mum, what type of order she's on. So there's a whole summary. It's just a briefing, and so that they go through. Then it is about the child, and so I'm not giving you names, but this mum was diagnosed with HIV, and so then that means that what we need to do then, and she's passed it on to the child, and so what we need to then do is work out what type of placement the family know about the child, and so the family, and we put all the things in place. And so all of the child, this is like usually about a 4-page document, but it really does go into particularly the child protection history. Then there's a component about eligibility for guardianship, and so is the child Aboriginal? Has the mother given permission? The views of the family are considered. Initially, I had to write a letter to the family asking, and so now we accept the families have agreed. And then we go into details about the cultural identity of the child, the mother, and the child's mother and father, and where they're from, and then any parents' connection to their community, connection to other families, connection to a child's cultural support plan, cultural activities that the child. Then it goes through relationships. So who are the key relationships within the child family? And so, mum, dad, grandmother, siblings, it lists everyone. And sometimes it can be 2 or 3 pages, just a family, and key people in the child's life. Then it has all the professional links. So, it's a paediatrician. So this child's got a paediatrician of infectious diseases, and they've got to work at the Aboriginal community mental health, maternal child health, because the child's only a baby. Then it goes through the court order, what type of order, date of order, expiry date, first protection order, criminal justice involvement, any court appeals pending. And then it goes through the current placement, the type of placement, date of placement, placement stability comments, whether the child's in childcare, kinder, school. Normally goes through health, it goes through education, it goes through and everything to sort of so health, date of last health assessment, any health concerns, any medications, any psychotropic medications, does the child have a disability, are they accessing NDIS, blah, 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 education, and so that's relevant to this. And then it's full on child protection history about mum, all of details, all of the reports ever made on mum and dad, and so and then they go through placement history, case planning, and then it goes through key tasks for Noogle, and so this one's pretty short because it's only a baby. So if it's a child that's got huge, lots of things that, you know, then it tends to be a lot longer. But and then what happens is we submit that. I write a letter, and it'll be sent to the secretary asking for to transfer guardianship of this child to me, and then I'll get a letter from the secretary saying that authorisation has been granted for me to take over this child. And so then the caseworkers do a lot of the work. And some of the things with ACAC is that the retention rate for workers is much higher than any of our other programs, and job satisfaction is much higher because they can see what they're doing is making an actual difference, and so changing lives. And so it's been really interesting to look at the retention rate for that program as well.
The second part of the question
The referral.
that you had was around how the organisations get chosen.
Yeah.
And so part of that is the organisation expressing an aspiration through to the department. And then they have a series of, you know, readiness capacity assessments. And then they go into an as-if process. So they act as if they have guardianship. So it's not the full process, but they get, we mentored Ballarat, who've just passed over the line. But the as-if process takes, what, Auntie Muriel, 2 to 3 years, really, because there's less hurdles to jump through because we did them all first.
We call it an as-if process before we start. So you go into sort of take on more and more responsibilities until you demonstrate. The issue that we have is that some of the regions are really good. When we first started, we had some real challenges. You know, there's one worker, every time I mention her name, all my stuff goes to trauma, because this woman would make it that we had to be perfect. And one of my, staff, Connie, she worked for Child Protection. She was a director high up in the department, and she's like, "Hey, you don't get it perfect. Why do you want an ACO to be perfect? You don't, And so she would push back on the department, but it was really hard. They would just didn't believe we could do it, and they made things really challenging. And there was a particular case, and we've produced a video on it. And it was two young people that were in out-of-home care, and their mum for numerous years wanted the kids back. And mum was, she had mental health issues, but she was doing okay. She wasn't drinking, or she wasn't, her issues were more mental health. And she'd moved to Stradbroke Island. She was doing really, really good. And what happened was we had the guardianship of these as-if guardianship. And so a request was put in for the children to go up there to visit their mum on Stradbroke Island. Anyway, so we escorted the children up, did the assessment, found the placement, with mum to be safe, even went around to other Aboriginal people in their community, and they spoke so highly about her and how well she was going. Anyway, when we went to bring the children back, one of them said, "I'm coming, but I don't want to go back. I want to stay with my mum." Anyway, we basically agree because Mum was doing so well and because of the assessment. But the department and us, we had a real out and out Barney over it. We had to put it up to the next level. And at that time, Denise McLaughlin, who was a really good woman and was really socially just and really believed in ACAC, she said, I can't understand, why would you say no if Mum's doing well? The sad part about it is, you know, and like the daughter worked with her mum for 3 months before she came back to Melbourne because she got homesick to Melbourne because they were on Stradbroke Island. There's nothing to do there for young people. So when she came back, her mum died a few months after she came back.
Oh.
Yeah. And so they did a video, both of them did a video about how much that meant and the importance of, you know, and why they believe so much in ACAC, because they said VACA fought for us. Now, the older sibling works for us, and she's just went to work for the department, but she's now begging to come back to VACA because her grandmother worked for us, her aunties worked for us, her family is, you know, throughout VACA. So Aboriginal organisations become like family to people, and this young girl sees us as her VACA family. And I know that about 4 years ago, I went to a Australia Day function out at Belgrave, and there was a permanent carer there that came up to me and she was like, Auntie Muriel, I was hoping you'd be here. And I said, really? Because I didn't know who she was. She said, I'm a foster carer of VACA. She said, I would never have went to permanent care if I'd have known I was going to lose VACA as my family. She said, I would get all your newsletters, I'd get invited to Christmas, I'd get invited to NATO. When I went to permanent care, I lost you as my family. And so it's something that we're really consciously thinking about. Is if we want children to go home and stay home safely, we have to look at what's our aftercare and what's our permanent care approach. Because I just think families, particularly that don't have a strong cultural, background and been removed, need to have that cultural contact after leaving care.
And I think to add as well, that's the part that the other ACOs, obviously the cultural aspects is what they do well, and we support them. I think the reason we put that compliance slide in the pack is that's usually where they struggle in terms of putting all of the regulatory systems in place, the workforce in place to actually meet the guardianship requirements. That's the compliance is the hardest part, and that's why we wanted to share with you all of the different elements that we have to do for reporting, the systems that you need as an organisation to be able to support, all the good. We can tell you a million stories of really great outcomes, but it's that backbone of the organisation, I suppose, that makes it possible and what we've invested in ourselves to do.
Yeah. Can I ask another question in relation to the confirmation of Aboriginality of all Aboriginal children in care? Since is that legislated or is that a policy
No
requirement?
We just do it as part of the cultural support planning. And so because what was really, really sort of disappointing to me is if we don't give them their confirmation of Aboriginality. What happened was that about 7 or 8 years ago, I had a young fella, beautiful young Aboriginal fella, and you could see he was Aboriginal. And he said, no one will give me an Aboriginality. And he said, Auntie Muriel, I've been in VACA's foster care. Would you give me an Aboriginality? And now on that basis, and no, you wouldn't. But he didn't have a genealogy. We'd done nothing culturally with him ever, and there was no need because, we were providing him with a home and a roof, and he had good carers and everything like that. But the one thing he wanted was a confirmation of Aboriginality. So I think that's you know, what we've got at the process. So when a cultural support plan comes to me, there's a pro forma that's attached to it. And so that pro forma, you know, asks questions, has the child been consulted, have, you know, and what is the education? So we go through a whole set of questions about metrics against the cultural support plan so that I can sign that off, because I just want to know that they've done all the things around confirmation of Aboriginality. And so one of the things that we embedded into our process, that all Aboriginal children will have a genealogy, and for at least 4 layers, 4 levels. I think it should be, most times, most people go, you know, can go back 10 levels, and they do. But for when the minimum I will do is 3 levels, but now I'm finding that's not far enough for some of our kids. So looking at how do we get, how many levels do we get? But now we've just introduced the process that to do confirmation of Aboriginality. The kinship family finding team are taking referrals, and they said we can turn them around in a couple of days, because we're not looking for, you know, huge lots of records. We just want to confirm they are Aboriginal. And so that helps the board. If the board gets, you know, because the view is that you must be known and accepted, but link of accepts a different definition. And so we've been trying to apply that same definition, because from my point of view, this is the today stolen gen, not yesterday's stolen gen. So you don't want kids that walk out of care at 18 and come back in and say, you know, I want to find my family. And so all the things, and the kinship family finding actually links kids to kinship wherever they come from, wherever they are, and so creates opportunities that, and like, not many people know all the benefits. We had a young person that was placed out in Ringwood, I remember, and one of my really strong Aboriginal workers went out to pick him up, and anyway, he was telling me about the car journey down, because he came from Framlingham, and he said, look, Muriel, he said, I could have killed that kid. He said, I don't know. He was sitting there, and he's like, them Aboriginal, those people, they, and he said, you know, it was, and he was not, you know, connecting at all, and he wasn't really respectful, and he said, I just, you know, just biting my tongue. But he said he took him down to Framlingham, and at that time, Uncle Banjo Clark, who was a really prominent Aboriginal man, was living down there. And the first thing they both said to him is, take your shoes off, we want you to feel your country. And so Uncle Banjo took him around Framlingham and told him about all the Aboriginal people that lived there, what they contributed, talked to him and said, this is your family, these are your family here, they lived here, they've lived here all their life, this is what they've done. And it was interesting because, you know, Dixon said on the way home, this young fellow was my family, my community. And he said, just tweaked him, he just got it. And he said it was just interesting to see how quickly you can, you know, engage young people through telling them that, you know, they come from a rich Aboriginal tapestry, that, you know, their people were warriors. And so it just, and as I said, it coincides with, you know, what Dr. Bruce Perry says about, you know, children need to be connected to their culture, need to know their stories, and it is a real resilience, and it is, you know, makes children much more mentally stable and able to adjust. But there's still, as I say, I think, you know, I've been in this for so long, and there's still so much more that I've got to learn.
But not all ACCOs do it, I think, is the important part as well. So we have a position where we have the statewide coordinator for cultural support plans, and we ran an information session, and we had CEOs from other ACCOs come, and they have, them and their boards actually have very different views of when and why you would do a confirmation of Aboriginality. As Auntie Muriel said, we think it's the right of the child to know who they are and where they come from, because it helps. Others don't, and they don't have the same investment, I suppose, in in family finding and looking back and looking at genealogies. Genealogies are required as part of a cultural support plan, but sometimes if you can't confirm, you de-identify, and sometimes a cultural support plan is used to say, well, they must be Aboriginal, but like we've talked to you, some kids aren't. And so there's a few that just won't do confirmation of Aboriginality, especially for kids. So we carry the burden of that, and we take applications not just for kids in care. So, and as Auntie Muriel said, there's nowhere to go if you haven't been part of the child protection system, and how you get it for your kids as well. So VACA is usually where people turn.
I've got another question, which goes to a point that was made about when there is a transfer of guardianship to VACA, that the cost is not commensurate with what is a costing that the department bears. So what does that look like for you in terms of the roles and responsibilities and the functions that come with, you know, VACA and other ACOs with delegated authority with guardianship?
Yeah, I think we've been fairly aggressive in negotiating, and so I think it is about understanding all elements. I mean, I think Aboriginal organisations get duped a lot of the times. When I first started at VACA, we didn't know all the, you know, twerks, but it was bringing non-Aboriginal people from the department into VACA that actually knew. You know, like we were sitting there doing everything on the cheap and doing it for nothing. When I first started at VACA, we were funded for 26 kids and we had over 200. And, you know, I remember on a Friday night one time, somebody came back and said, I can't cope with this child, you have to take it. We couldn't find any records of this child. So, you know, VACA this is, you know, obviously 20, 30 years ago, but, you know, like, I think the department doesn't always put in the room what resources they have. What's really proving beneficial is things like targeted care packages at the moment. So we've got TCP, so that they are providing resources to families to keep children at home, or for kinship carers to take on children. So, for instance, this is, you know, you're not going to believe this, but it's true. A kinship carer, her house was almost condemned. Her kitchen wasn't, you know, wasn't livable. We funded her for 100,000 to do her kitchen so that she could take her grandchild.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the alternative would be, how much would it cost us instead of 20 years of taking that child? So the TCPs are used for, like, there's a young girl, she has got her brother, he's got autism, and this was, for me, a really, really eye-opening event. We had a NAIDOC event, and she would have regular respite, and so she left the child. We would take the child into resi care, and so we had really, you know, his autism was under control, and his older sister was managing him. But she went on respite and gave him to us. We took him to a NAIDOC function, and at the function they had all these lollies. So he had these lollies, and he had an episode, and what happened was that he started really playing up. The police were called. They put handcuffs on him, you know, the car. He smashed everything in that car. He feces all over the car. It was just, we didn't know what to do. I felt so powerless. The police couldn't do anything. The workers couldn't do anything. They rang the uncle. The uncle came down within 2 seconds. His behaviour had just de-escalated. But I got a call from the sister the day after, and she said, I do not give him lollies. He does not have any sweets. She had a really good regimen and things like that. But it just to me, a demonstrator, and like she gets a targeted care package for respite for him, and she gets a targeted care package for all of the additional supports that he needs. It's a child with autism. Now he's another child. We've never seen them again, and they're doing really well. So they're by having targeted care packages and being able to put all those things, disability packages and everything around children. Children can go home and children can live safely, but being able to offer that. The other thing that we do well is lead tenant. And so what happens is I become the contract holder. So a young person leaving care wants to live independently. So he's 18, he wants to have his own flat. There's no way that they'd be able to, put together the bond. They wouldn't be able to sign a lease. So I become the leaseholder and I pay the bill. And so that means that young people leaving care have access to affordable, and then we, for a period of time, to pay a portion of their rent to be able to, and we're seeing that being accessed by a lot of young people, and really good accommodation, not cheap, really substandard, because leaving care, we used to, set them up for a life of homelessness or really put them more into poverty and put them into suburbs where they were, going to commit crime, would be involved in, all the people around them. If you put them in social housing, most of the issues have people there have got mental health and drug and alcohol. So some of the things that we're also got in is, I forget the name of the program, but it actually provides resources to carers to keep children longer, young people longer. So it provides, what's that called? Breaking cycles, what's it called, Sarah? I just launched with.
Yeah, you've got me on that one.
Paul Donald. I'll look it up, I'll find it, what it is.
I think the difference too is the positions that, you kind of take for granted. So in the department, they've got no shortage of lawyers, where we need to hit a certain threshold of the number of kids we have until we get funding for a lawyer. It's other things where in the department per region, we know that they've got dedicated positions. Say for like Aboriginal-led family decision-making, they have a convener. And so there's 17 of those, but, 15 in ACOs, I think it is. So they have dedicated roles where that might be, one of 3 portfolios our staff members hold. So we kind of have the same, but not to the matched capacity. They'll often say that, their case numbers are higher, but in reality, they're not. So it's the hidden roles, I think. I love to look at Seek ads and LinkedIn ads because it tells you more about what a company's actually doing and reforming. And you see these roles crop up and you think, what's that going to do? And will we get a matched? And you don't. They're hidden. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, I think that the program is home stretch.
Home stretch.
Yeah, so
is that to prevent, that means that children don't have to leave care at 18?
That's right. And so we've got a commitment to children staying in care till 21. And so, but the home stretch payment actually is an allocation of funds. And I think we've just developed some resources. Do we have those? Do you have those, Sarah? Yep. Send those across as well. I think I've sent you. I've sent you the documents. I think. No, they're still in drafts. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to send those to you, April.
Thank you. Is that the home stretch document?
That'll be Sarah. I'm sending you the ACAC
Okay, yeah.
MOUs and program requirements. I feel like we're gonna send you a lot, bombard you with documents. So that has the MOUs that we sign up to, but also the program document. So we've been sort of, they're publicly available, but they're hard to find.
Yep.
Yeah. I think, have you got anything else you want to do?
You wanted to chat about some?
I didn't go.
Very comprehensive presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm
I
just,
got the right address because I've sent it to you.
We'll bombard Denise.
Yeah,
That's all
yes,
right.
please.
Yeah, I'll pass those all on.
yeah. There is, it's been a very comprehensive presentation, but I just want to go back to something that I think just in your opening remarks around, you've got 8 child protection systems in Australia, some good and some bad elements. But the reality is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are overrepresented. I guess I wanted to get a sense of what was happening in Victoria to get a sense of what are those good elements and what are those bad elements.
I think Sarah highlighted it in that diagram where she said that there's the system sees the Aboriginal before they see the issues, and they don't believe that families can change, so they go to the, to the default position is let's remove the child. There's one hospital in Victoria, Melbourne Metro, where it's well known that they will report on Aboriginal babies. Every Aboriginal baby that goes in there, they virtually do report on.
Yeah.
So it is about systems that are inherently racist in the way that they see. And so how do we, I mean, that word is a horrible word at the moment. It seems to be, used, you can't even say it at the moment without somehow, pointing the finger at somewhere. But it is, if, that diagram Sarah showed, if that's showing, did you want to put it up and go through it just briefly, Sharon?
Unborn one.
Yeah.
The graph,
Yeah.
the unborn child concerns.
Yeah. So this, and the reason that we asked it, because in, I think it was Boston, there was research and I got sent from one of the other CEOs, and it was this, it was a Black American, and what happened was is that when they looked at the number of notifications, then they looked at and they basically de-identified it, and so they focused on what were the protective concerns, and the numbers of notifications on children of colour dropped dramatically. And so when you don't know name, and so this view, if you say you're Aboriginal, you're more likely to get your child removed. So should, if you go before child protection, take out the de-identifying information and you might get treated like everybody else. So what are we saying? If this, what this like saying is we've got a system, and I think that's what alarms me most is, and then there are some regions, like if you belong to a particular family, then you're already, because like if I talk about Mildura, which is, sort of, you would know where Mildura is. It's sort of 6 hours out of Melbourne. Now, in Mildura, and some of that borders some of your area too, but Mildura has 2,000 Aboriginal people, right?
Oh, wow. Yep.
And so when you look at the data, and when you look at, they've got the highest overrepresentation, the highest juvenile justice, the highest family violence, the highest imprisonment, and what I've basically heard is it's probably about 400 people that cause all of that. So imagine if you chunked it off and said, what am I going to do with these 400 people that's different? What do I need to do in order to, prevent all the family violence, to prevent all the child protection, to stop, their kids going into juvenile justice? What do we need to do? So, I don't know that we take a place-based, or we take, a broader approach to understanding what it is, really understanding the demographics. So if you were looking at, say, Murray Bridge or one of those, what would you want to know? Like, what's your Aboriginal population? How many of these families are actually, involved in child protection, family, juvenile justice? And do you go with something like that, or do you just keep going with the same old? So, I just think we've got to be able to break the cycles.
Yeah.
But I mean, the system, we've got 4 systems. Like some of the things is at times we find that the central office policy is really good. They're supportive. They're saying, like funding for Aboriginal community control. And then we get to the regions, and their view is that, oh no, we don't believe the ACO should be doing it. So you've got central office policy not aligning and regions not taking it on. So part of the issue. And so, and who are most of the people that are averse to taking on child welfare? It's those men as CEO don't want to do child protection. So when is it feminist aligned? When is it, when Aboriginal men have a different view about taking on ACAC? I've not unpacked it, but it just sort of seems ironic that the region with some of the, with Aboriginal, really strong Aboriginal men, really good parents, good people, not, they're not as everybody would put them up as bullies or, really, men that are, against Aboriginal women. Some of them are under the thumb of, heavily under the thumb of really good Aboriginal women down there. So, got grandmothers that they wouldn't dare put a foot out of place. But how we get to, how we win over men to take on ACAC is really a challenge. How do we win over boards? Some of the boards, like our board, we were always talking about what it is and, the value of ACAC. And our board was I've got a board, I think 3 or 4 of my board have been well and truly over 10 years. Most of them have been, 2 of them are to 20 years of being on the board of VACA. So, there's a lot of, when you have that long, longevity in the board, it's actually important. But it's really important that the board understand risk, that they understand the strategic, that they're engaged. It's important that they don't get involved in the operations, of day-to-day operations. I think I made one mistake, and I'm still traumatised by it. I took a policy on maternity leave to the board for them to consider, And I nearly walked out with all women should have 2 years of paid maternity leave. It was just, it got so far out of control. So there's, that now I very much watch what goes to the board, that it's not operational, because, like having I had a board member one time when he first started, and the rest of the board are really great now. But when he first came, he said, Muriel, I want to know who takes cars home at night. And I've got something like 550 cars. And I thought, what do you mean? And he said, well, I want to know who takes them. I said, excuse me. And then the rest of the board chimed in, Danny, that's an operational issue. That belongs to and Muriel wouldn't even know herself, and we don't need to know. So he said, and I said to him, look, it's fine if you ask what's the policy about it. That's different too. But who does it? What not? So the board are really, really clear, but I think some of that in local communities, the blurred lines, some of the issues that have really impacted us have been some of the CEOs have had to leave because the organisation just, if you're a pensioner and you're on a board, or if you don't get a lot of money, and if you're a CEO that's on 180,000, then, and you want to be paid what the market is. If you've got a board that's on a pension and don't, what we have is trying to, we have a number of the board that are actually allocated for remuneration of the CEO. Yeah. So it's not, and then we go to market to look at what the market says and provide really good information. So, but I just think these are some of the challenges when you're setting up that you've got to have. You've got to pay CEOs. Do you know how much the first CEO, when I started, in fact, you know how much they paid the CEO? This is like 1997, 30,000.
Oh my Lord!
I know. I said
it's a traineeship salary, level 1 entry.
Yeah, and that's what the Commonwealth funded. So, and so this was where, when I started, the organisation was almost under administration. Somebody said 10 was over the paper to, cancel the funding. But what the board had done is paid this person to come on board. We'll give you 30,000, but we'll give you a credit card. And so these are the additional things. So when the media and everybody they only saw all the credit card, and it wasn't a lot of money. He wasn't spending, 100,000s on this credit card, but it just got misrepresented. There weren't policies in place. There was no real understanding of the department to say, hey, he only gets 30,000. Market value is, 80,000 at that time. We couldn't compete with that. So we, and it was justifiable, but it was never, they were hung out to dry. And so anyway, but the community were all ready to hang him. Right? He's used his credit card and anyway.
And look where Vaca is today, one of the amazing exemplars. Just one, there's been reference, just for the record, to ACAT. Are you able to just spell out what ACAT stands for?
Yeah, Aboriginal Children and Aboriginal Care. So it's, we didn't like the name guardianship or Section 18. And then our Noogle program is, we've named it Noogle. And I think I wouldn't even try and say Bendigos, but it's something like Wataka anyway, but that's the abridged version of it. But there's, it'd be really good if you could bring Badak in and interview Dallas, because they would give you really good information as to a regional ACO, and, and perhaps help you push for regional footprints, because they're out of Bendigo. They tend to get a lot of people that are transient, go to Bendigo for jobs and things like that, and so they've got have high Aboriginal population, but they also have a lot of people that go from Mildura to there, that go from Chuka to there, so they're a central between Inland and Mallee.
Thank you very much for an absolutely wonderful presentation and for the information you've provided, Muriel. It's been just so invaluable.
Sarah put that together after our conversation with you.
Thank you, Sarah.
You've done a great job, Sarah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Her people are from New South Wales, so she's been a godsend to us as far as our policy for our communications as well. So Sarah does a lot of the fundraising, and if you look at our website, you can see really good information. So really sort of the other thing we didn't talk about, Sarah, was the Deadly Portal. Just want to touch on that before we move.
To help with cultural support plans, we got funding to develop Deadly Story, which is an online portal. And what that team does, it's really only like 1.2 EFT. It's not enough, but you can access that yourself, deadlystory.com, and they go and talk to traditional owner groups. It really is that repository of all of the cultural information of all the different traditional owner groups, but they do
from all over Australia.
Yeah, all over. And they're developing more and more agreements with traditional owners, especially as we move towards treaty here, to get more of that information in there to help with return to countries. But they do educational videos. They do this huge amount of resources that are available to anybody, not just professionals. Like it could be a carer or a parent that's like, oh, what am I going to do? And all ages and stages. It's a phenomenal resource that we actually talked to your government about it. They tried to steal it, remember? They tried to steal Solomon. But it's have a look, because it really is that background piece that you need to help with cultural support planning and cultural immersion.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions, and we'll close the hearing. Thank you.
We've got another hour.
Thank you so much.